They called her the family failure, until the day her private jet landed. Stick with her while she shares her story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. Her name is Maeve Ellison, and for as long as she could remember, she had been the odd one out in her family. She grew up surrounded by people who seemed to shine without effort. Her siblings, Clara, Wesley, and Judith, were always praised, always celebrated. If Clara got a new haircut, their parents acted like she had reinvented beauty. When Wesley landed his first job, they treated him like the next titan of industry. Judith could walk into a room, and people would already be talking about how charming she was, while her parents nodded with pride as if they had raised royalty. And then there was Maeve. She was the one who didn't quite measure up. If she earned a good grade, it was brushed off as luck. If she tried something new, she was warned not to embarrass herself. Her siblings made sure she remembered her place. Clara smirked and liked to say, "At least one of us will keep the Ellison name respectable." Wesley would pat her shoulder like a child, saying, "Don't worry, Maeve, not everyone is built for success." Judith, with her sugar-coated cruelty, would tilt her head, smile sweetly, and say, "Some people just aren't meant to stand out. And that's okay." The moment that seared itself into her memory happened one Thanksgiving. The house smelled of roasted turkey and spiced apple. The table gleamed under the chandelier, polished silver laid out perfectly. Everyone sat dressed in their best. Her siblings filled the air with stories of their latest victory. Clara's promotion, Wesley's investment deal, Judith's charity gala. Maeve stayed quiet, knowing nothing she said would matter. Then her father's voice cut through the laughter. He looked at her, fork in hand, and said, "Maeve, maybe it's time you stop pretending. You're a waste of tuition money. You should just focus on finding someone to take care of you." The room went silent. For a heartbeat, it seemed like someone might defend her. But Clara laughed into her wine glass. Wesley shook his head like it was sad but true, and Judith reached across the table to pat her hand in mock sympathy. Their mother stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the cranberry sauce. Heat rose to Maeve's face, but she didn't cry. She swallowed hard, stabbed a piece of stuffing with her fork, and forced herself to chew. At that table, surrounded by smug smiles and polished silver, she realized something cold and sharp. She was alone in her own family. They had already written her off as the failure. That night, while they toasted to their futures, Maeve made a promise deep inside herself. One day, she would prove them wrong in a way they could never ignore. In her early 20s, Maeve poured everything she had into the family business. She showed up before the sun came up and stayed until the lights went out. She studied contracts, managed client calls, and even came up with ideas that saved money and brought in new deals. Every late night and every early morning, she believed that if she worked hard enough, her family would finally see her value. But Clara and Wesley had different plans. Whenever Maeve presented an idea, they found a way to twist the story and make it sound like it was theirs. If Maeve created a new proposal, Wesley would repeat her words in meetings as if he had written them. Clara had a habit of waiting until Maeve solved a problem, then running to their father to explain how she fixed it. Slowly, all the recognition Maeve deserved slipped from her hands and into theirs. The betrayal cut even deeper because Maeve stayed quiet at first. She thought her parents would notice. She thought they would see who was really putting in the work. Instead, her parents praised Clara and Wesley for being sharp-minded and natural leaders. Maeve, sitting there at the same table, went unnoticed, her voice drowned out by their easy confidence. Then Judith joined in. Unlike Clara and Wesley, she wasn't interested in stealing credit. She went for Maeve's reputation. Maeve began to hear whispers that investors had doubts about her. At first, she didn't understand why. Then a client quietly told her that Judith had been spreading stories, saying Maeve was unreliable, too emotional to handle business, and careless with details. None of it was true, but the damage was done. People started second-guessing Maeve, avoiding her suggestions, and turning instead to her sibling. When Maeve tried to defend herself, her parents refused to listen. Her father told her she was imagining things, that her siblings would never treat her that way. Her mother only shook her head and said Maeve should let it go. The final blow came when her father pulled her aside after a meeting. He didn't lower his voice, didn't soften his words. He told her she should stop trying to play the businesswoman. He said, "It would be better if you found a husband and quit pretending to be smart." The words hit harder than anything her siblings had ever done. Maeve stood there, humiliated, her hard work erased in a single sentence. She realized that no matter how much effort she gave, her family would never see her as an equal. They didn't just doubt her, they wanted her out. And that's exactly what happened. Within weeks, Maeve was pushed aside. Decisions were made without her. Clients stopped calling her. One morning, she arrived at the office only to find her name removed from the team list, her desk emptied out by someone else. No one explained. No one apologized. Her siblings stood together, smug, while her parents pretended it was all for the best. Maeve walked out of the building that day with nothing but her pride in tatters. The family business she had poured her energy into had spit her out like she was disposable. The humiliation burned deep inside her, but beneath it, something stronger began to take root. A quiet, steady anger. Maeve left her family's house with almost nothing to her name. All she had was an old car that coughed and rattled when it started, and a single suitcase stuffed with the few clothes she could grab in a hurry. There was no goodbye, no hug at the door. She drove away in silence, her chest tight, her hands gripping the wheel as if letting go would make her fall apart. She found a small apartment on the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the floor creaked, and the heat barely worked in the winter. The walls were so thin she could hear her neighbors arguing late into the night. Still, it was hers, and she locked the door each night, reminding herself that at least it wasn't the family house where every look was heavy with judgment. Bills came fast, and her savings drained quickly. To keep herself afloat, Maeve took a job as a hotel maid. The work was hard, scrubbing bathrooms, changing sheets, and cleaning up after guests who never thought twice about the people picking up after them. She started before sunrise, pushing a heavy cart down long hallways, and stayed long after most people were asleep. Her hands blistered, her back ached, and sometimes she could barely lift her arms by the end of a shift. When that wasn't enough, she picked up a second shift at the same hotel. Double days became her normal. She'd wash her face in the staff bathroom, tie her hair back again, and keep going. The pay was small, but it kept the lights on and bought her enough groceries to get by. Some nights she ate only instant noodles, staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, wondering how her life had fallen so far so quickly. Even with all the exhaustion, Maeve made herself one promise. She would never go crawling back to her family. She would never stand at their doorstep, asking for help, letting them smirk and say they were right about her all along. She would rather live in that broken-down apartment forever than give them the satisfaction of seeing her beg. Weeks blurred into months. Her body grew tired, but her mind stayed restless. She kept searching for something, anything, that would give her a way out of the cycle she was stuck in. That chance came on a night she wasn't even looking for. Maeve was cleaning one of the hotel's top-floor suites after a group of wealthy travelers had left. They had been laughing and drinking late into the night, their voices carrying down the hallway. When she came in to tidy the room, she noticed one of them had left the balcony door slightly open. She heard voices from the adjoining suite, two men still talking as they sipped their drinks. She froze for a moment, rag in her hand, listening without meaning to. They were discussing private jets, cargo routes, and luxury clients who would pay anything for speed and discretion. One of them mentioned how the future wasn't in airlines, but in private aviation and logistics for the rich. Maeve's heart thudded. She didn't understand every detail, but she understood enough. This was a world built on money, connections, and service. A world she had just stumbled across by accident. For the first time in months, she felt something spark inside her. It was small, fragile, but it was there. That overheard conversation planted an idea that would change everything. One afternoon, while Maeve was stripping beds and wiping down mirrors, she ran into a guest who was waiting in the hallway for his room to be cleaned. His name was Ronan Pierce. He had kind eyes, a weathered jacket slung over his shoulder, and a pilot's badge clipped to his bag. Unlike most guests, he didn't treat her like part of the furniture. He asked her name, thanked her for her hard work, and even joked that the hotel would fall apart without people like her keeping it together. Maeve wasn't used to kindness from strangers, so she kept her guard up at first. But Ronan didn't push. He just talked like an ordinary person. Over the next few weeks, she saw him more often. He stayed at the hotel regularly because he flew private routes for wealthy clients. Little by little, he shared stories about his work. Long flights at odd hours, demanding passengers, and the complicated world of aviation logistics. Maeve listened closely, asking questions whenever she could. She was curious, and Ronan noticed. One evening, when his flight had been delayed, they sat in the hotel cafe drinking coffee. Ronan leaned across the table and said, "You've got a sharp way of listening. Most people glaze over when I talk about scheduling and routes, but you actually get it." He told her he believed she had potential to do more than cleaning room. She wanted to laugh at first, but he was serious. Ronan introduced her to a couple of contacts in the aviation world, dispatchers, coordinators, and managers who kept things running behind the scenes. Through him, Maeve landed a small job as an assistant, the lowest position in a crowded office. She filed papers, answered phones, and made coffee runs. It wasn't glamorous, but she watched everything with sharp eyes. She studied how charter flights were arranged, how clients made special requests, how every detail mattered when the wealthy were paying top dollar. Maeve discovered she had a knack for solving problems others overlooked. When a shipment got delayed because of a missed call, She spotted the issue and fixed it before anyone else realized. When a client demanded last-minute changes, she rearranged schedules smoothly, saving the team from embarrassment. Her instincts were fast, and people started to notice. Even Ronan pulled her aside one day and said, "You think 3 steps ahead. That's rare." The more she learned, the clearer it became. There was real money in this industry, more than she had ever imagined. Rich families, touring artists, politicians, and executives all depended on private flights. They wanted speed, privacy, and discretion, and they were willing to pay anything. Maeve realized she didn't have to settle for being a helper forever. She could build her own company, one that delivered exactly what high-end clients want. And deep inside, another thought grew alongside that ambition. She didn't just want success for herself. She wanted revenge. Every insult, every smirk, every word her family had thrown at her burned in her memory. If she could rise high enough, they would have no choice but to see her. Quietly, she promised herself that one day, they would choke on their own laughter when they realized what she had become. Maeve threw herself into work with a fire that never went out. Every morning she was up before the sun, and most nights she was still at her desk long after the city had gone quiet. 18-hour days became her normal. She barely saw the inside of her apartment except to shower and sleep for a few short hours before doing it all again. Every dollar she earned went straight back into her dream. While others her age spent money on clothes, vacations, or nights out, Maeve lived on instant noodles and black coffee. She wore the same few outfits until the fabric thinned and the colors faded. Her shoes wore down, her hair often tied back in a plain knot. She didn't care. She wasn't building comfort, she was building something that would last. Piece by piece, she put her plan together. With Ronan's encouragement and the knowledge she had gathered, she registered her own small company. She called it Ellison Air Charter, not out of love for her family's name, but as a promise that one day they would regret ever thinking she wasn't good enough to carry it. At first, Ellison Air was just Maeve with a phone and a laptop in a rented office space no bigger than a closet. She handled calls, organized schedules, and begged contacts to give her a chance. Most people brushed her off, but Maeve didn't quit. Her first real break came when a touring musician's manager called in desperation. The band's flight had fallen through, and they needed a jet within hours. Maeve pulled strings, bargained hard, and worked her contacts until she found a solution. By dawn, the band was in the air, and Maeve had pulled off what looked impossible. The manager told everyone in his circle that she had saved the tour. Suddenly, people started calling her. That one success opened doors. A week later, a corporate executive booked through her. Then came a small sports team. Each time, Maeve delivered exactly what she promised, no excuses. Word began to spread that she was the one who could be trusted when others failed. Slowly, Ellison Air Charter grew from a desperate idea into a name people respected. As the business gained momentum, Maeve realized she couldn't do it alone. She hired a few people she trusted, hardworking, overlooked people who reminded her of herself. There was Hannah, sharp with numbers, Luis, who could charm anyone over the phone, and David, a mechanic who knew jets better than anyone Maeve had met. They weren't just employees. They became her chosen family, bound together by loyalty and long nights of work. Together, they built something bigger than Maeve had ever imagined. The office grew, the flights increased, and so did the profits. For the first time in her life, Maeve wasn't just surviving. She was creating an empire, brick by brick, flight by flight. And she knew this was only the beginning. While Maeve was climbing higher, trouble was quietly spreading through her family's world. Clara and Wesley had been enjoying the spotlight for years, but behind the polished smiles and bold claims, they were careless. Clara signed deals without checking the details, convinced her charm would cover mistakes. Wesley spent company money on risky projects, bragging that he was pioneering the future. Those choices began to backfire. Accounts slipped into the red, and creditors started calling. What had once seemed like brilliance now looked like recklessness. The family business, which had stood firm for decades, began to wobble. Clients grew cautious. Partners hesitated. Behind closed doors, meetings stretched late into the night as losses piled up. Clara insisted things were fine. Wesley promised the next deal would fix everything. But numbers didn't lie, and the numbers told a story of decline. At the same time, Judith faced her own disaster. Her marriage, once flaunted as the perfect match, crumbled in public. Her divorce turned ugly, with lawyers dragging every detail through the courts. Settlements drained money the family didn't have to spare. Assets were split, property was sold, and the scandal gave the press plenty to whisper about. For a family so concerned with appearances, the mess was more than just expensive, it was humiliating. Their parents, once so full of authority, were no longer strong enough to hold everything together. Age had crept in quietly. Their father's health slowed him down, and his sharp mind dulled under stress. Their mother, who had always kept up the family's image, struggled to manage the cracks spreading too fast for her to cover. What wealth they still had was tied up in ventures that were sinking fast. Investments made years ago that no longer produced the steady flow they had counted on. Soon, whispers began moving through their social circle. At dinner parties and country clubs, people leaned close and spoke in low tones. The Ellisons weren't as untouchable as they had seemed. Their reputation, once polished to perfection, began to fade. Invitations grew fewer, smiles more strained. Old friends avoided their calls. In a world where image was everything, the cracks were impossible to hide. Clara kept insisting they were still powerful. Wesley boasted about deals that never quite materialized. Judith pretended her divorce was a victory instead of a loss. Their parents tried to smile through it, but the weight of decline pressed on them all. The family that once dismissed Maeve as nothing more than a burden now faced their own downfall, piece by piece. The estate that had once been full of laughter and gatherings now felt quiet, heavy with tension. Servants whispered in the halls. Neighbors noticed the changes, and the shine of the Ellison name dulled in the eyes of everyone who once envied them. They had mocked Maeve for being a failure, but now their own empire was slipping through their fingers, and there was no one left to blame but themselves. The gala was alive with glittering gowns, polished shoes, and the low hum of voices trading promises and power. Waiters moved quietly with trays of champagne, and the smell of rich food hung in the air. In the center of it all, she carried herself with calm certainty, her presence drawing attention without effort. People leaned in when she spoke, her words measured, her tone steady. She no longer looked like someone trying to prove her worth. She looked like someone who already owned the room. Every detail about her showed change. The cut of her dress, the way her hair caught the light, the steady confidence in her eyes. It all told the story of a woman who had built herself into something unshakable. No one could guess how much sacrifice it had taken to stand there, or the long nights behind the quiet strength she now displayed. What mattered was how naturally she belonged in that world of polished wealth. As she moved through the crowd, exchanging nods and handshakes, two familiar voices cut through the air. One was bright and sharp, the other loud and careless. She paused, turning slightly toward the sound. Across the room, a pair of faces she hadn't seen in years appeared through the crowd. They were older now, carrying the stress of choices that had weighed them down, but still performing for attention. At first, they didn't notice her. Why would they? They expected to see the same tired girl they had dismissed long ago, not the woman who stood before them now. She stayed still, letting the moment unfold. Clara glanced up first. Her eyes lingered, puzzled, trying to place the face that seemed both familiar and strained. Wesley followed her gaze, his smile faltering as he studied the figure across the room. Confusion shifted to realization, and then to disbelief. It hit them both almost at once. The silence between them stretched thin before Clara whispered, almost to herself, "Maeve." Her tone was uncertain, as if saying the name might prove her wrong. The answer came not in words but in a smile. Cool, sharp, and unreadable, it held none of the softness they remembered. It was the kind of smile that kept people guessing, the kind that gave nothing away. Wesley tried to mask his unease with laughter. "Well, look at you," he said, but his voice carried strain. "Didn't think we'd run into you here." Her gaze rested on them, steady and calm. After a pause, she answered with quiet precision. "It's been a while. That was all. No stories, no explanations." She left the silence to do the rest. They stared, unsettled, unsure what to say next. Their world tilted as they tried to match the woman in front of them with the memory of the sister they had once dismissed. With a graceful turn, she walked away, her cold smile lingering behind her. She had no need to reveal more, not yet. Their shock was enough for now. The news reached her through a quiet conversation at a polished dinner table. Investors, the kind who rarely wasted words, mentioned a family business that was slipping fast. They spoke of desperate meetings, of promises made that could not be kept, and of a legacy crumbling piece by piece. She listened without showing emotion, but inside, every word struck her like a match. She knew exactly which family they meant. In the weeks that followed, the picture became clearer. Clara and Wesley were scrambling, holding out polished smiles for anyone who might lend them money. Judith, weighed down by her divorce, could offer no help. Their parents tried to keep up appearances, but the strain was showing. Behind the closed doors of fine boardrooms, the Ellison name had lost its shine. What they didn't know was that the very investors they were courting had already turned elsewhere. Quietly, carefully, those same men and women approached her. They had seen what she had built, how steady her growth was, how reliable her leadership had become. They offered her something unthinkable, the chance to take control of the company that had once thrown her aside. She didn't hesitate. The opportunity was too sharp, too perfect. Papers were signed in discreet offices, transactions moved through silent channels, and shares shifted from one hand to another. No announcement was made, no rumor escaped. While her family begged for help, She was becoming the one who held the power to decide their fate. Each signature felt like stitching up an old wound. She remembered the words that had cut her years ago, the looks of dismissal, the laughter at her expense. Now, every page signed was proof that she had not only survived but had risen higher than they could ever imagine. She didn't want them to discover it through gossip or whispers. That wasn't enough. She wanted to watch their faces when the truth dropped, wanted to see the disbelief as it settled into their bones. So she waited, holding her silence, letting the game play out until the perfect moment arrived. That moment came in the form of a family reunion dinner. Invitations were sent out, the promise of tradition and togetherness pulling everyone back to the long dining table where so much had once been said. Her siblings planned to use the evening to boast about deals, to convince their parents that salvation was close. None of them suspected that salvation had already slipped out of their reach. She imagined the setting clearly, the polished silver, the clinking glasses, the voices filling the room with shallow laughter. They would expect her to stay silent, to remain small. Instead, she would rise with the kind of power they had never thought she could hold. The plan was set. The stage was ready. All that was left was the performance, and Maeve was prepared to deliver it flawlessly. The estate had not changed. The tall gates still gleamed, the gardens were still trimmed to perfection, and the long driveway curved like a promise toward the grand house. Inside, the family gathered as they always had, dressed in their best, glasses of wine in hand. The dining room buzzed with talk, though much of it carried the same sharp edge it always had when Maeve's name slipped into conversation. She never did much with herself, Clara whispered to a cousin, her tone dripping with false pity. Wesley smirked, adding that she was probably still chasing odd jobs just to get by. Judith rolled her eyes and claimed she had heard Maeve was renting some tiny place in the city, barely making ends meet. Their parents didn't correct them. They let the talk run on, as if agreeing in silence. The laughter was cut short by a sound no one expected. A deep roar filled the air, faint at first but growing louder, shaking the glasses on the table. Heads turned toward the tall windows. The unmistakable thunder of jet engines rolled over the estate, drowning out every voice in the room. Confusion spread across the faces of the guests. Someone hurried outside, and soon the news came back in a shocked whisper. A private jet was circling above and preparing to land on the estate's own strip. The Ellisons had not used that runway in years, not since their fortunes had started to turn. Now, with engines screaming overhead, everyone rushed outside to see. The jet descended with a grace that silenced the crowd. It touched down smoothly, the sunlight catching its sleek body, the logo of Ellison Air painted boldly on its side. Gasps rippled through the onlookers as the aircraft rolled to a stop. No one spoke, they only stared, waiting to see who would step out. The door opened slowly, the staircase lowering with deliberate weight. And then she appeared. Maeve walked down the steps in a gown that shimmered beneath the fading light, her hair pulled back in a style that framed her face with quiet power. Every step was steady, unhurried, the kind of stride that belonged to someone who knew she was in control. Behind her followed a small group, the team that had stood by her side through long nights and hard climb. They carried themselves with the same confidence, their presence alone enough to show they were not just staff but loyal allies. The family stood frozen, their laughter from moments before gone, replaced by shock that rooted them in place. Clara's smile faltered, Wesley's jaw tightened, Judith's eyes widened. Their parents clutched their glasses tighter, as though holding on to the last piece of their control. Maeve paused at the bottom of the steps, her gaze sweeping over them all. The quiet that followed was heavier than words. She had arrived, not as the failure they remembered, but as someone they could no longer ignore. The dining room glittered with candlelight, silverware gleaming against fine china. The family gathered around the long table, whispers and uneasy glances still hanging from the shock of her arrival. Maeve sat at the far end, posture straight, her eyes steady. She had not come to blend into their world again, she had come to end it. The first words came from Wesley, his voice strained as he tried to recover control. So, Maeve, looks like you've done well for yourself. But I'm sure you're here because you need something. His smirk was thin, nervous. Maeve's lips curved into a calm smile. You're right, she said softly, her voice cutting through the room. I'm here because I own something. She paused, letting their confusion settle before continuing. The company, Ellison Enterprises. The same one that once threw me out. The investors you begged for help? They came to me. And I didn't just save it, I bought it. Gasps broke out around the table. Clara's wineglass shook in her hand. That's impossible, she said, her voice breaking. You couldn't have. Maeve leaned forward slightly, her tone sharper now. You stole my work, Clara. You claimed my ideas as your own and laughed when I had nothing left. Wesley, you signed your name on deals I built from scratch and told the world I wasn't worth listening to. And Judith, her eyes locked on her sister. You called me unstable, whispered lies until no one trusted me. You each made sure I was shut out. Tonight, I'm here to tell you I'm the one who decides if you stay in the company at all." Silence followed, broken only by the sound of forks clinking against plates as trembling hands set them down. Their parents stared, their faces pale, unable to form words. At that moment, two investors seated nearby raised their glasses. "To Maeve," one said proudly, "the only reason Ellison Enterprises has a future." Their voices filled the air with praise, each word twisting deeper into the family's shock. Maeve let the moment stretch, then rose from her seat. Her presence filled the room, commanding every eye. "I didn't come back for your approval," she said, her voice steady and final. "I came back to take what should have always been mine." No one spoke. No one moved. Her words hung in the air like the strike of a gavel. She didn't wait for their response. Turning on her heel, she walked with quiet grace through the hall, her loyal team falling in step behind her. Outside, the jet engines waited, a low rumble in the night air. She climbed the stairs once more, pausing only to glance back at the house that had once broken her. The doors closed, the engines roared to life, and in moments she was airborne again, leaving behind only silence, shattered pride, and the echo of her victory.